Chair Walls and members of the Education Committee, I'm Senator Megan Hunt, M-E-G-A-N-H-U-N-T, and I'm here today to present LB1027. I'm introducing this bill in partnership with the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs. Some of our public institutions, our schools, continue to use the names, images, and icons that are sacred to Native American tribes as mascots for school sports teams and activities. Many Native people in Nebraska have been telling us for years that this is harmful and hurtful to them. Only in recent years has this been getting more recognition, as some sports teams and colleges and schools nationally have started to discontinue the use of Native mascots. There are many reasons why, and I believe some of our testifiers will speak more to the impact of the use of Native mascots on Native people and their legacies and history. To broadly summarize, many Native people say that the use of Native mascots makes a caricature of their people and dehumanizes their experiences. Historically, the creation of Native mascots was part of a larger strategy to justify our nation's inhumane treatment of Native Americans and to reinforce white Americans' views of them as uncivilized, violent group of people. As we continue to use this imagery, we're continuing to reinforce prejudices and stereotypes while failing to educate our students properly about our true history. The American Psychological Association recognizes that the use of these mascots in schools has a negative effect on the social identity, development, and self-esteem of American Indian students, and contributes to an unwelcome and even hostile learning environment for them. This can magnify the cultural trauma these students already endure and have ripple effects well into adulthood. The American Psychological Association has called for the retirement of Native mascots for nearly 20 years now. Over the summer, I was moved to draft a potential bill that would have banned schools from using Native American mascots in Nebraska after reading about our neighbor Colorado's success in passing this type of ban. However, shortly after Colorado's ban was passed, a lawsuit was filed challenging the constitutionality of the law. That lawsuit raised questions as to whether the forbidding of only Native American mascots, but not mascots of other racial or ethnic groups, is constitutional. That is, the plaintiffs allege that under the 14th Amendment, the state cannot discriminate against or give preferential treatment to any racial or ethnic group. After discussing it with the Nebraska Commission on Indian Affairs, Senator Brewer's office, and the Reviser of Statutes office, we made the decision to not pursue a ban until that federal case was decided. This case is still working its way through federal district court. Instead of a ban, I opted for a different approach, which is to incentivize those schools currently using Native mascots to make a change and to provide them with the resources necessary to make those changes. I would also like to acknowledge Senator Wishart, who had the original idea for this bill. She serves with me on the State Tribal Relations Committee, and we've discussed this several times over the past few years, and as a member of Appropriations, she thought that this would be a good solution, and I agree. I thought it was a good solution, so I'm proud to be the one carrying this forward. This is a very common sense and fair solution to this problem. With LB 1027, we're not telling any school that they have to change their longstanding mascots if they're truly averse to doing that. But for those schools that do realize that their mascots are hurtful and wish to change them but may not have the resources to do so, the state is offering them the funds they need to do that. A community might have the will and the desire to replace the school's mascot with something more appropriate, and maybe they've wanted to do that for a long time, but they haven't had the money to do it. You have to change the scoreboard, you have to repaint the field, and then the basketball court, and then the uniforms. You know, there's a lot of costs, of course, with this kind of thing. So what we're doing with 1027 is enabling those schools that want to make a change to finally be able to do it. I want to mention the fiscal note. The fiscal note is estimated at up to $4,400,000. This is assuming that all 22 of the schools in Nebraska take the full $200,000 grant to offset these expenses. So hypothetically, the cost could be that high, but I don't think that it's likely that it would be that high. It would just depend on how many schools applied for the grant and how much money they really needed to make those changes. So I think the fiscal note is a little bit inflated. there's no doubt that people you will hear from, whether it's in testimony or in email or in the common discourse, can say things like, well, this isn't harmful because what we're doing is we're honoring the people, we're honoring the tribe. But I would just ask us to listen to the Native Americans who are affected and remember that it's not our right to define the image of a group of which we are not members. It's exploitation. And I would also like to note that our Nebraska Rural Community Schools Association recently conducted a survey of their members on this issue, which is really informative, and I'm grateful for their efforts and their help. In that survey of the 16 members of the NRCSA, 8 out of 12 responded that they have had conversations exploring the changing of their mascots. So I do think this is something that many of the schools would use. I'll turn it over to testifiers now, and I will offer some additional points at closing.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Questions from the committee? Senator Hansing-Brooks.
Thank you for bringing this bill, Senator Hunt. I love this new twist. I really like that idea of offering grants to help the schools change the various forms of their mascot, and I'm proud of you, or I'm grateful for you bringing it forward.
Thank you. I think that, you know, I'm a supporter of schools too, and public schools and education, and I know that our rural schools are already stretched very thin. And I am also one of those people that's against putting unfunded mandates, especially on already hard-hit and underfunded groups of people and communities. And so I don't think that this is a lot of money to ask from the legislature in the big picture, and I think that this will improve the culture in these schools, but that money will also improve the experience for the students. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Monahan.
Thank you, Chair Wells. Thank you, Senator Hunt, for being here today. So in the green copy of the bill, it does say $200,000 per school district. So how did you come up with 200,000?
200,000 was the number that was estimated by several of the school districts as the cost to change their uniforms and their scoreboards and their sign and, you know, just kind of all the costs that would go with rebranding basically the school and changing the mascot. It's not necessarily going to be that high for every school, and I didn't hear any estimates that it would be higher.
So do they have to submit what their cost is before they get the $200,000?
They have to apply for the grant, and the Nebraska Department of Education would establish all of the rules and regs and procedures and criteria for granting that money.
Okay, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair Walls, and thank you very much to the tribal leaders and advocates who came here today to share their experiences and testify. And colleagues, all I have to hear are their words. When Judy Goshkabosh, a member of the Ponca and Santee Sioux tribes, tells us this is not what Native people like. We do not want to become caricatures. This is not honoring us. For me, that's all I need to hear. I say, okay, I've got a platform to do something about it. Why don't we take the opportunity to fix it for you? And I also want to acknowledge that I think we would have had many other tribal leaders here, but we understand the problems with taking time off work and travel time for the tribes in Nebraska. And I passed out a letter from the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska in support of this bill, so you have that on the record as well. As I was listening to these testifiers and thinking about all the letters we've received and the conversations I've had over the past 4 years here in the legislature about Native American issues and justice, I was thinking about the conversation we were having on the floor this morning, actually, and the points I was making and that I really believe about people should not have to reveal and perform their trauma for people in power in order to receive their basic human dignity and rights. I thank always the people who are willing to expose their vulnerability and talk about the harms that they've suffered in a plea for justice and equity. But colleagues, they should not have to do that. Nobody should have to come up here and talk about the suicide statistics or the horrible racial epithets our children are called on the football field. In a meeting earlier this year, I was told by an education leader for one of the tribes that they weren't even going to play non-tribal schools anymore in sports because they were hearing so many racial epithets being thrown at these kids. And what is this doing for their educational experience? So they've got to go to South Dakota to play football and basketball. Like, it's really against the whole mission of public education here in Nebraska. And there's something that we can do about it. Another factor I feel it's important for me to acknowledge, and that we've heard from Ms. Goshkabash, for example, is that Native American people, of course, are not monolithic in their views and their values or in their support for this approach. There's enough support from Native American people who I spoke to make me feel like this bill was a worthwhile effort, but I want to acknowledge that there are many Indian people who don't feel that they can support this and would rather see a full ban, as Judy Goshkabash said, a funded mandate, because incentivizing schools to make the right decision by giving them money is, in a way, enabling or rewarding an oppressive institution. It's saying, you've oppressed us for all these years, now here's some money to stop oppressing us, when really they should make the decision to do that themselves. And some people believe that this is what we, as white institutions, have done as part of our legacy of oppressing Native people, and that it's our responsibility to make it right. So I hear that, and I'm willing to explore solutions, but I'm proud of this bill because I think it could actually serve as a model to other states. Because this bill, LB1027, it's not about shaming, it's not about telling the schools how racist they are, it's about growing, and it's about giving institutions the opportunity to correct their wrongs, which frankly, realistically, let's be honest, in 2022, costs money. It's not going to be free for these schools to change. And a lot of the schools that would be affected are not in rich parts of Nebraska, in wealthy parts of our state. So, you know, as members of the legislature, we have access to some wealth that we can distribute, and I think that this is a very moral, correct decision. I'll speak to Senator Merman. I encourage all of you to speak with him as well. I hope that we can vote this out unanimously, because there are a number of bills and a number of priorities that this could be amended onto. And we could just kind of see what happens. I'd love to see what the schools do with this opportunity, and I'd love to see them take the opportunity to better their institutions for everybody in Nebraska. Thank you.